Welcome to Redacted Tonight. This is the comedy show where Americans in America covering American news are called foreign agents. You've probably heard the news, folks. There's an epidemic of China forcing Uyghurs to labor against their will. The Guardian says there's a good chance your cotton t-shirt was made with Uyghur slave labor. My God, man! Our clothing is made by Uyghur slave labor? All these years, I thought it was made by other kinds of slave labor. Not Uyghur slave labor. I mean, I knew my Nike shoes were made in Vietnam by workers earning $73 a month. My iPhone is made of metals mined by children as young as 6, risking their lives amid toxic dust just to get a few pennies from the big electronics firms. And my Levi jeans are sewn by workers in Bangladesh, earning little more than 3,000 taka a month. So we're all just covered in disgusting labor practices and abuse and blood, sweat, and tears. No, seriously, ads for this jacket literally boast of a, tears laminate that keeps it kind of shiny. Even though you and me and every American eat, drink, and human rights abuses, that still doesn't mean it's okay for China to use forced labor. So, that being said, let's look into these rampant stories of Uyghur forced labor. According to Max Blumenthal at the Gray Zone, the first claims of forced labor came from this Associated Press article in December 2018. One day later, in a coordinated effort, the Worker Rights Consortium put out a press release calling for the athletic company Badger to stop using forced labor in Xinjiang province. And after getting badgered, Badger caved to the pressure. So where did the AP get their info? As the Gray Zone points out, most of it came from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, ASPI. This is a right-wing think tank funded by, wait for it, the US State Department, the Australian Defense Department, and weapons contractors. Sounds like an unbiased view to me. ASPI pumps out an endless stream of baseless anti-China diarrhea. So after the Associated Press does their story, the New York Times and the Financial Times follow up with their own stories of China's forced labor. Where do they get their info? Mostly from, wait for it, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. Crikey! So as you can see from the chart, the pile of it flows downhill like mud in a mudslide. Except instead of mud, it's and the slide filters down to the New York Times and the Financial Times, and then it keeps going down down the hill to the cable news channels. In 2019, the Worker Rights Consortium put out an extensive report on the forced labor in Xinjiang. So where did they get all that information? Where did they get it? I'm glad you asked. The Gray Zone looked into it, and the info came from these sources, okay? First, you have Radio Free Asia, a U.S. government-sponsored news service that even the New York Times once called, quote, a worldwide propaganda network built by the CIA, unquote. So we can forget that meaningless source. Next, the U.S. government. If you trust their claims, then you should probably just give up on life, because the part of your brain that questions anything is dead and shriveled. So we're done with that source. Next, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. Those motherfuckers again? No one believes you! Go back to playing boomerang or cooking kangaroos on the Barbie or some shit. Next up, Adrian Zenz. Now, I've covered Adrian Zenz before. He's a lovely, very nice evangelical Christian from Germany who believes that he's at war with China and that all Jews will be burned in a fiery furnace when the end times come. He really said that. He also has been shown to completely misinterpret data. That's a nice word for lie when it comes to accusing China of all kinds of crazy stuff. I'm pretty sure he said he had proof that China was indeed the cause of his small penis. So we're crossing him off the list. Wow, that is a gnarly group of sources so far. That's like a friend just saying, I have it on reliable authority that you should invest all of your money in Kraft tapioca pudding because the stock is about to jump 500%. And then you find out that the sources for your friend's stock tip are 3 tapioca pudding salesmen, a dog, and an anti-Semitic pedophile. But that still leaves Human Rights Watch, right? That still leaves them. They sound legit, you know? But they too signed off on this extensive report. Well, as the Gray Zone points out, Human Rights Watch was created in 1978, mostly as a U.S. regime change tool. Back then, they spent most of their time accusing the Soviet bloc of human rights abuses, never noticing any of America's extensive list of human rights abuses. And to this day, Human Rights Watch continues to almost exclusively accuse America's adversaries of violations. And they're mostly funded by our old friend, George Soros. Oh, that looks a little stark, don't you think? Can you make him look a little more festive? I mean, like, I don't know, much better. Soros is a hedge fund billionaire who believes he's at war with communism and that China is out to get him. Pretty odd that someone like Soros, who survived the Holocaust, is allied with Adrian Zenz, who believes all Jews will burn in a fiery furnace. But here we are. The head of Human Rights Watch is a man named Kenneth Roth. Under Roth's leadership, Human Rights Watch justified the NATO military intervention in Libya after neglecting to oppose the U.S. invasion of Iraq. It has also refused to call for an end to U.S.-Saudi assault on Yemen that has produced the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. Human Rights Watch has campaigned ceaselessly for toppling leftist governments across Latin America. So Kenneth Roth and Human Rights Watch defend all human rights as long as it's not humans being destroyed by the American empire. Those human rights are a little less important. And by a little, I mean a lot. And by a lot, I mean not important at all. So, back to the big chart. Of their awesome sources for this extensive report, there are no awesome sources for this extensive report. Basically, the Worker Rights Consortium cobbled together their anti-China report from a slew of comically biased sources. But, why would they do that? Why not go out and get real, legit sources? Could it be that the claims of forced labor are a complete fabrication of Western government agencies and government-linked agencies? No! 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 The Workers' Rights Consortium didn't just put out this report. They even created a whole thing called the Coalition to End Forced Labor in the Uyghur Region. And I'm sure that coalition is legit, right? Well, the steering committee of the coalition all have one funder in common. Wait for it. The National Endowment for Democracy, or NED. What is NED? In the words of one of the NED's founders, the organization was created by the U.S. government to do today what was done covertly 25 years ago by the CIA. That has meant quietly funding civil society and media outlets to destabilize states where the U.S. seeks regime change. So instead of saying something is done by the CIA, they can say something is done by NED. Sounds so much nicer, doesn't it? It's not the CIA, it's NED. Ah, it's Ned, like Ned Flanders. Ned could never do anything bad. It's Ned. Ned's like the guy who doesn't smoke but always has a lighter with him just in case you need one. Oh, Ned, I love Ned. But something annoying happened in the past decade. People like you and me started to realize that NED was shorthand for CIA. So they had to launder the brand of the already laundered brand. Like a criminal who's put on a fake mustache and then realizes he has to add a funny wig because the mustache just doesn't cut it. That's why NED started funding things like every organization in the steering committee of the coalition to end forced labor in the Uyghur region. And when Max Blumenthal asked the Worker Rights Consortium if they too were funded by NED, the CIA, as well as their steering committee, they got quite snippy and wouldn't answer the question. Long story short, all of the forced labor reports about China come from either the NED, the CIA, other U.S. government regime change operations, Human Rights Watch, which is a U.S. government regime change operation, Australian Strategic Policy Strategy We Hate China Strategic Institute, which is funded by militaries and weapons contractors, and finally, some crazy German anti-Semite guy who looks like he sells sexual lubricant out of a gym bag on a subway platform. That's literally it. That's the whole, that whole group is it's just a dungeon of trolls, maggots, and rotting roadkill. And here's the thing, if China is forcing people to work against their will, then I'm not opposed to talking about it. But I can tell you one thing, I'm not believing those motherfuckers. Give me some real proof. Show me video of the firefighters roped into slave labor. Show me photos of the garment workers behind bars. Real evidence of mass forced labor camps. Oh, sorry, those images are all in the United States. Both Trump and Biden have announced that the true enemies of America right now are China and Russia. And what do you know? Suddenly we see people coming out of the woodwork to accuse our great adversaries of human rights abuses. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia can literally chop up a Washington Post journalist, and we're like, hey, buddy, can we still send you some weapons? Do you need anything? You know, you need a little something? We're always here for you. Chop up whoever you want to chop up. We'll send you Ginsu knives. Those are the best for that kind of thing.